I wanted us to meet because, I just realized at one point that the Matrix was 10 years old, I think, this month.
Well, in my mind, it's a little bit older just because it was kicking around,
Right.
playing around with diagrams and stuff in the spring of 2009.
That's
Yeah, that it came out to the world and stuff. Probably this is about that month. Yep.
Yeah, but in general, I mean, I remember, meeting you and you saying, "Hey, I came up with this thing last week," and it was the Matrix.
May have been
And
the
I know
final touches on it. I know
right.
that the actual I did a little bit of research on it, and when I did the diagram for functional contextualism,
Hmm.
that I then inadvertently stole from myself to make into the Matrix, and that was supposed to be to present to some students and internship students at Togus, which I never did. It snowed or something, and I never got to make the presentation. But
Yeah.
that diagram was like in December '08 or January '09. But it didn't occur. I didn't derive relationally frame whatever GRR up the connection to using it as the matrix diagram later on. But that was after I listened to. No, I wouldn't listen. I read that book. What was that book?
Direct
Derived
relational
relational
experience.
responding, da 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 da. That really god awful hard thing to read. But it
Hmm.
was at the end of that book that I wanted to do the trauma memory sorting game. So,
Right.
and that was, and if you look at that book came out in spring of 2009. That's when.
Correct. Yeah.
So, that's it's all pegged into that. So yeah, fun stuff. It was someplace. I also remember standing back from it, uh, probably with Gerald or something, and I said, that thing could go viral in sort of a slow kind of way. Uh, and I guess it did, over time. It's marched along and got around the world, and that's been fun.
Yeah.
Just because it was catchy and it was easy, a lot easier. Back then, we were, well, I guess I was trying to make the hexaflex easy. I guess
Yeah. Wait.
lots of us were trying to make the hexaflex easy. I was like, wow. So that worked. And so it's been a lot of fun ever since.
That worked
And then
pretty
in
well.
2011, 2012, that's when I got in with David Sloan Wilson and them, Steve Hayes doing the pro social. And then we added the what's our shared purpose loop to it. So then came the pro social matrix loop. So haven't added any more since then. That's enough.
Does this too.
Don't need any more.
So do you want to describe maybe for people who are not familiar with it, the basics of the matrix? What?
Well, the basics,
Yeah.
I'll go through the very originals. Okay, so the original was that it's a little bit of a twofer story. One, I'd heard a podcast from JT Blackledge talking about RFT, and he got to wax it along, how people do. And he one time says something like, RFT comes down to transforming five senses experiencing onto words, onto mental experiencing. Now, I told him that later on. I said that. He said, really? I said that? I said, well, it was something like that. And he said, yeah, I could be saying something like that. But that was fun. And so I had that idea of the transformation of five senses experiencing into mental experiencing instead of language. And so not too long after that, I was reading that book, Derived Relational Responding. And at the end, it was talking about applications. And they kept having people doing sorting games. And so the first sort that I came up with was, well, you could sort between your five senses experiencing and your mental experiencing. So in regards to PTSD, it would be, what were my five senses experiencing at the time of the trauma versus what are my memories of the internal stuff like fear and whatever were going on with me at the time of the trauma. So that would be the first sort. So there's the vertical line. So we have five senses at the top, mental experiencing at the bottom. And then we needed something toward the way showed up, and it was like, well, like a soldier. Think of a soldier out fighting. So what would a soldier be out fighting for? Toward, well, peace and justice, I don't know, whatever, the kind of things that the person would be fighting for. But of course, what kind of stuff is showing up inside of a person that's really, one, scaring them, and they would rather not be there and they would like to run away, natural thing. So that gave us the toward and the away side. And so to this day, that's how it reads. Five senses at the top, mental experiencing at the bottom, moving toward, it's usually abbreviated to who and what's important to you, to the right, and moving away from, the term I like is moving away from yucky stuff. Doesn't feel good, you don't like it, so you want to get rid of it, so you do some behavior to lessen it or get rid of it. To the left, it wasn't, you were probably, by the time that, you had probably known about it not too long after that, because some months later we added the 4 questions. And so the 4 questions are in the lower right. Who's important to you? Actually, the original question was, what's important to you?
What's important, yeah.
Right. But I found out later on that if you ask who's important, almost everybody can answer that. Where what's important, not everybody can answer it. So who, and then later on I add what. But who and what's important in the lower right. Yucky stuff in the lower left, fear, pain, stuff that doesn't fit. Behaviors you do to move away in the upper left, and behaviors you do to move toward in the upper right. And so that's the complete matrix, just the matrix in and of itself. And then along comes you, and you wanted to write an act book, so it becomes the act matrix, right?
Yeah.
That was after the guy, it was being called the grid. Now, early on, it was grid. And then, what's his name? Jim Bastian, right? Jim Bastian. Yeah, he was over at the Brattleboro retreat at that time. And I was talking with him a lot back then. And he said, hey, Kevin, you got to call it the Matrix. I'm like, well, why do I got to call it the Matrix? He says, because it's got Keanu Reeves sexy attached to it. So that is an absolute true story. It forever more became the Matrix. And because it's got Keanu Reeves sexy attached to it. It still works. He's still quite the popular star. He's got all those John Wick movies out now and stuff. So, but anyway, that was a lot of fun. But then then it was what the Hexaflex made simple.
The Hexaflex made simple. But this piece about the what's important, for sure, when you first showed it to me and I started using it, and then the question became what's important, and sometimes people would get stumped, and then I would have to ask, well, if you could choose a life, if you could know what's important, would that be important? And they would go yes, so you'd write something important, but it would be a bit clumsy for sure. And then with the who, it made it so much easier. And you're right, anybody can answer, and either can be somebody alive, it can be somebody who's not with us anymore, who's not yet with us, even pets and
dogs always get in there.
Right. And And then, of course, when you ask first who's important, it's a very small step towards the pro-social matrix, right? Because then, for humans, the who is central to what's important to us.
Pretty much is, yeah. And it was during the period of developing the pro-social matrix was that really came in. I realized that the who question was a better question to start with. Another thing, if people aren't familiar with the matrix, the most important thing is to get people involved in the process and having them have success with the process. And so when you say, oh, who's important to you? And they say, hey, my dog's important to me. And you say, great, we can put that right down here in the lower right-hand part right there. Well, they were this successful. Like, oh, great. All right, here we go. And you're into the process. And of course, many of us that do this a lot, they can say a rock is important. And we would say, great, a rock. And we okay. Because you want to get people involved in the process. You want to get them into doing it, not whether things are right or wrong or not. Okay,
Yeah,
great.
in all my time of asking who's important, just one person said, she started tearing up and she said, I would rather not start with who's important. Can we talk about what's important? Sure. Let's do that.
Absolutely, not a problem. Right. And that since we switched to who, it's almost never. I think one time some nefarious prisoner kind of person, and I'm serious, I used to work in prisoners, so something like, nobody's important to me. And I had to catch you come with, well, I mean, at any time in your life, like even when you were a baby, was there somebody who's important to you? Well, I guess when I was born, my mother was important. There you go. But that's why you're saying, it's really a broad question, like any time, anywhere, future, past, present, future, whatever. So I think that's the one and only time I ever had anybody kick back at all. Most people just say who's important to them. And most of the time, people will also include me. I'm important. Okay, great. Put that up there too. Cats.
When they don't, I actually.
Parrots, horses.
Yeah. But when people don't name themselves as important, I will always ask them. I say, "Oh, I noticed you didn't name yourself. Did you just forget?"
That comes in handy later on to get the person up there. So, but I don't know. I don't know what the percentages are on that, but a lot of times they do.
Oftentimes they just forget. So you just go, "Oh, I noticed you didn't write yourself," and they go, "Did you just forget?" And go, "Oh yeah, I just forgot." And other times they'll just, a story will show up.
Yeah, well, it's all about the story.
It's all about the story.
That came to me later on, much later on, about the Matrix. It's people telling their story into the Matrix, but they're telling the story in a new way into it. And so, which is perspective taking, and that gets all into it.
I think it is. And what allows them to eventually tell their stories in a new way is, I think, the simplicity of the Matrix really helps people see the function of the stories, right? So you put the story in there, and then basically it will either move you toward or move you away, and it's really easy to see it, which with other ways of going about it would not necessarily be so visible to.
Yeah, it would. Oh, I didn't finish how the Matrix started, and so I have to go a little bit technical, but I will. I figured from some research I had read and stuff that if you had somebody pause and notice the difference between their five senses experiencing and the mental experiencing, and in that moment that they were noticing that difference, that would add a smidgen of psychological flexibility to their, whatever you want, mental activity, to the being, let's say, put it that way. And with that little bit of extra psychological flexibility, there would now be the greater probability of driving up new responses. It's a technical thing, but that's what I was looking for, was that ever so brief lifting of the person off of the story, in this case, trauma memory stories, and just allowing a teeny little bit of flexibility in, and with that, hoping that they would derive up a new response. Same thing goes for noticing the difference between how it feels to move toward versus how it feels to move away. In that moment that you're reflecting on that difference, it increases the chances that, increases psychological flexibility and increases the chance of driving up a new response. And as you and I both know, that's essentially what you're doing over and over again with the matrix. It sounds like you're not doing that, but you're doing that. So over and over again. Yeah. That's the gorgeous thing about it, is it leads people to do a lot of perspective taking.
It leads them to do a lot of perspective taking. And another thing I've been starting to notice with it is noticing differences is essentially a discrimination task, right? Right. And when you go back to kind of some more basic stuff, when you're able to discriminate, well, you get into this realm of discriminative stimuli. So they're a little bit different, but in a sense, it's conditions of the context that tell you that, this or that behavior is going to be reinforced or not. Mm-hmm. And noticing those differences is a way of putting this, into your experience. Traditional approaches will speak of insight, and I don't think it's about insight. It's about noticing, and it's also this thing that Viktor Frankl talks about, like finding the space between stimulus and response. And it's a discriminative stimulus. It's like a little light in your rat cage that goes green, and then when it's green, you can press the lever, and you're going to get some food out of it. Right?
That's it, right? Yeah, it's amazing how. Looking back on things, how well this fits Viktor Frankl's, that quote of finding that little space in between stimulus and response. And that's sort of what you're going at here. That's what the noticing is about. And then, so that's sort of a layperson's way of, I don't know, it's a regular person's way of talking about derived relational responding, in that you can choose a different response, right? Now, of course, the behaviorists hate that language, choose a different response, but that's all right. I don't usually present the hardline behaviorists. I present to people, and people like that. They go, yeah, I can see that, right? Yeah, you get a little bit of space, and now you can mull over your different responses, and so that's a very fun thing, and that's what you're doing. Another thing you may have seen recently, but it's sort of fun to look at, is that if you start with the matrix in the lower right, it's who's important to you, and so that's the beginning of your quest or your journey, and then what kind of stuff shows up inside of you and gets in the way, and then how do you vanquish those things in the upper left, and finally how are you victorious in the upper right. And what we've just gone through is the hero's journey, which is the story arc for many movies, books that we all see. And I realize that oftentimes this stuff is killing up that in people, that hero's journey story, but back to the level of story again. And and we are all on our bit of a hero's journey.
That's kind of interesting. One way I've been exploring lately is one path around the matrix is to start with who's important, and then up into the toward moves, and then what shows up and gets in the way, and then into the away moves, and then back into the toward moves, right? And
Yep.
that's kind of, so you're talking about the hero's journey, and in fact, the hero's journey is a bit of both, right? All is well in the land, and everybody go happily around their business, and then something shows up and gets in the way.
Then shit shows up, right?
Right.
Well, it's
So
time to fight.
that also fits that bill.
Fight the monsters, right? Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, you could go just like that. Yeah. Oh yeah, you definitely can. But it fits that story arc well. And given it's something we're all taught from a very early age, that story arc that goes. And in the end, are you living a life that fits with where you want to go? How you want to finish up your life, which is a very deep question.
Yeah.
So, but it gets people, but people have fun with that hero's journey look at things. But yeah, you could. You're a matrix expert of thousands of times, and I tell people that once you learn the basic steps of the matrix, you can mix and match it however you want. That doesn't matter to me. What I tend to do is teach them in a sequence, just so it's like a kata in karate.
Yeah, it's almost like, learning scales or whatever,
Exactly, but
doesn't
once you
really
know the
matter.
scales really well, you can mix and match and play them forward and backwards. Do what you want. Yeah. whatever works for you. And a lot of people, I talk to, Mary Alice included, that's my wife. She oftentimes just runs the matrix in her head and helps people do the matrix inside their own heads, just inside the story. So not so much of drawing it up on the board, but just keeping it in mind and tracking conversation that way. And so that works well too.
That works well too.
I'm well conditioned to put the matrix up on a board and play with it up on a board, so it works for me up there. So.
Yeah, I mean, some people will be more comfortable with the kind of, traditional storytelling mode of what we do. And so sometimes they will push back a little bit when you show them the diagram. And I kind of do this dance where I go a little bit into the story and then back into the the diagram itself. So it's just
play around, figure out what works.
There's I wonder if you've one thing I use it a lot for these days is a kind of as a way to make rule governed behavior appear. So how people will kind of try in everyday language to try and find the right answer, right? Because it's so simple. It's much easier to make them appear like, so if you say something like, is this a toward or an away? And then they look at you this special way. The next thing I will say, my mind is telling me that maybe your mind is telling you that I want to hear a particular answer here. And then
exactly.
And then I go, actually, I think in fairness, your mind is probably right. My mind would want to hear you say this, but, who cares what my mind wants and what your mind thinks my mind wants? This is really about you noticing from your experience whether it's more of this or that, and only you can see it.
Yes.
So it's a super easy way to make to make this appear, which I think can actually get in the way of a lot of what we do in our work, because people will try and be the good client, and they will give you the answers that you want to hear, and then you'll feel like you've done a really good job and they're making progress, when in fact they're not, because they're not responding to their experience, they're responding to the stories once again, right?
Yeah. Keeping, as you said, the real government behavior, the clients, they think that you're telling them what toward and the way is. Keeping that off. but you learned your ways of doing it. But it's important for people to remember that people will tend to want to please you and sort things toward and away the way you would think they are. Doesn't matter. Where I put things doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. And I remember, you said this thing, and you don't want to get your dirty little hands into people's thoughts, right?
I know. Sometimes you will.
Right.
I mean, it's hard to be perfect with that. We're such sorting animals, we love to sort. So somebody will throw something at you and you'll spin around and put it in the matrix and go, damn it, I didn't.
So we're kind of, in our professions, especially like psychologists or whatever, we're kind of conditioned to do that because we're trained to conceptualize cases, to do this and that, which is, effectively sorting our clients. So
I'm pretty good. I don't do it very often, but every once in a while I slip up.
I'm mentioning it because, thinking of the people who will watch this, and this is something I see a lot in the people I train, that because of their, prior training, their minds will go, oh no, this isn't sorted right. This isn't really, they're saying this is a toward move, but I don't believe it must be an away move. And then they start responding to this rather than to what.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you can always, have them sort. Or say, okay, I am seeing something and I want to put that in mental experiencing. Put it down there. That'll drive your students crazy. Like, no, it's a 5 senses experience. I don't care. I want to put it in mental. It's trying to force people that wherever somebody wants to sort something, let them sort it there. Let them do it. Because it's the sorting that's important. It's not where it goes. It's the perspective taking that you take right before you do the sorting. And that's what this whole thing's about, is perspective taking. So the self is perspective taking, right? So, but it's hard to lay off sorting. That's. I mean, you get pretty good at it. I mean, you get to where you almost never do it, still do it.
And this, when you talk about this perspective taking thing, I don't know if I ever shared this with you, but we did this study that we may not be able to publish, but we did this study in Mexico where they were working with a borderline personality disorder, and they compared traditional ACT with the Matrix, based pretty much on our book. And the thing they did with the Matrix, whatever they did, at the end of the session, they would get the participants to sort what they had been doing on the Matrix, right? And one of the very interesting results that they got is they had much bigger increase in the stability of sense of self measure from the Matrix group, and which of course is a major difficulty for people meeting criteria for borderline personality disorders. And I believe that is because when you do the sorting, you get into this self as perspective, self, observer self, and it gives you this experience of stability, whereas beforehand you kind of get, pushed around by all these stories changing all the time. And just doing that task repeatedly gives you the experience that is so hard to give in words to clients.
Yeah, that is cool, but that makes sense, as you say, theoretically, because whoever McHugh did that book on the self as perspective taking, and it's all about perspective taking, and that would shore up. So then if we get into the middle of the matrix, we never have done that. The first middle of the matrix was noticing the difference between 5 senses and mental experiencing. And so that noticing the difference then becomes me noticing the difference. So a lot of people put me noticing in the middle of the matrix. And so that me noticing for most people would be pretty stable. You know,
Yeah.
a stable me.
Right.
And you're referring to as somebody who has been diagnosed with bipolar disorder or whatever.
Borderline.
I'm sorry, borderline, not bipolar. Sorry, borderline, another B word. Uh, but anyway, that can be conceptualized as an unstable me.
Yeah.
An
Oh,
unstable
absolutely.
me noticing. It's wiggling around on the matrix. And by repeatedly doing me noticing, me noticing, me noticing, me noticing many times across the time of the study, it stabilized the me.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
But you see, when we talk about noticing differences, I think the genius of the matrix is really, it's not just noticing any difference, right? It's noticing these differences that really make a difference. And I think you really got to the heart of it by the difference between five senses experience and how it's transformed into mental experience. And then the difference between toward and away, which is really the difference between, at the end of the day, between appetitive and aversive control, right? And
Mm-hmm.
these differences are, well, the toward and away, I think, is central to living beings, generally speaking. If they can't make that difference, they don't stick around in the evolution game for very long, right? They just don't. We don't have organisms alive that can't make that difference. And then the other one is very specific to those verbal animals that we are, right?
Yeah, the other is definitely the realm of humans. Maybe other animals, but we don't know their language. But as far as the human who has language, and so you have this rich mental experience, which,
And
by
I
the
think
way, people get stuck in. They get stuck in
that,
their mental experiencing. That becomes the reality versus what's going on in the five senses. And so all of this stuff is to
and
get.
I've got this sense, like that the toward and away works so well because, a living organism can only survive if moving toward is at the top of their behavioral hierarchy, right? So
Gotta
moving
find
away
food.
is a way to be able to move toward later, but not the other way around.
That's not the other way around.
Which of course,
Ultimately, you want to find food.
right, because our minds, but this is where our minds get us stuck because they will actually turn it around and go, oh, well, only move toward if it allows you to move away, only move towards a relationship if it allows you to move away from a broken heart or something. And this is how we get stuck into lives that drain from the meaning is not just verbal. I think the meaning is aligning with this, vital force of moving toward that you need to have if you're a living being of sorts, right?
But that's what, right. That's what it ends up being, is that you're living a life that you're cool with, however you want to put it. But ultimately it's that. And I don't think very many people are really cool with a life based on away moves.
No.
That's not going to be, I mean, can some of them be very workable? Sure. Yeah. Keep you living till the next day. Sure. But ultimately, yeah, you want a collection of behaviors, toward behaviors that you're okay with, that you're okay with it being put on your epitaph. The good old tombstone metaphor of act or whatever. So yeah, you're quite at it. But on the simple animal level, it's that they got to eat.
And
So
they got to
you might
reproduce.
run like hell to stay alive, but you got to
Right.
come back and you got to find food.
You've got to metabolize energy and you've got to reproduce, right?
Right. That's it. Past that, you flunk Darwin's whatever that was. You don't get and you get expelled from the rat race. From the run.
Yeah.
So now you got to be successful at that. So yeah, ultimately that's it. Yeah, you don't want to But I like your thing. Noticing the difference, that's really a difference. It really makes a difference.
Yes, and then it almost functions like one of those attractors, right? Mathematical attractors or whatever they are,
Oh
that
yeah,
kind of
I love those.
organized behavior after a while, right?
Yeah, and some people you quite use those terms, but that's how they describe living. Which all of this conversation comes to the seeds of the podcast that I do, The Art of Being, which was this kind of talk,
Right.
which was the seeds and what people's take on the art of being. Not so much based on the book, The Art of Being, but just sort of what is this art of being? What is this thing of me noticing? Let's finish off. So we start with noticing the difference in the middle, and then we usually go to like me noticing, and this me noticing for a long time, and then actually that progresses to being in the middle of the matrix, and in the end, your being or being is what you're doing.
Yeah.
And it gets to, so are you doing these toward moves? Are you moving toward who and what's important to you? Then you're being.
Yeah.
That's the trick of it. And part of that is suspending off of the name. The name everybody calls me and all of that. No, that's not you. No. That's not you at all. You are what you're doing. That's you. And to get to that kind of point with this is the fun thing that you can do with the matrix, sort of. And then as soon as you get that, you'll lose it. So you got to start practicing the more to get it back. That is not an easy state of being, because then you flip on the news and get yanked back down into reality. But I think a worthy thing for humans to do and to contemplate. One of my favorite things to say to folks, and people ask for advice, right? What should I do? What should I do? Man, I am crappy at advice. I don't know what you should do. But what I usually do is if I don't know what to do, I think of somebody who's important to me and I go do something for them. And you know what? That works every darn time.
That's a pretty good piece of advice.
But what's that have to do with what I was asking you advice on? Oh, well, I have no idea if it fits or not.
No.
I don't know. But I just know that when I'm stuck for something to do, I go do something for somebody who's important to me or what's important to me, and eventually things work out. So seems like a worthy thing. So once again, that advice is getting back to you are what you're doing, really. So
I just, I use this matrix all the time with all of my clients. We're now on this. We've joined this called Acorn collaboration, so we're able to measure our clinical effectiveness with it.
Oh my God, really?
Really effective. We have like average effect sizes in my center using this at 1.2 almost, versus 0.8 on average for others, and also we're twice as fast.
Really?
And not just that, but people come back like other, so the collaboration brings together clinicians from all sorts of approaches. And only one person in two comes back for a second appointment, on average. But with us, it's like 80% or something.
Oh,
So
wow, cool.
It's also more acceptable. We know that.
Well, that's a great outcome.
It's quite nice. But it still doesn't work for everybody, right? And I wonder, what if when you use it, it works all the time, or if not, what your thoughts on that are? What's going on when it doesn't work?
I don't know. I don't ever worry about it not working. I know that it doesn't, some people just don't grab it and don't.
Some people stay stuck, right? Whatever.
very stuck or whatever, I'm very willing for people to be where they are and what they're doing. And it's like, this matrix thing's not floating their boat. That's okay. I can go see somebody else. I'm certainly not in a position where I can say, oh, gee, I'll change what I'm doing. Like, that would be disingenuous of me, because the matrix is going to leak back into what I'm doing no matter what. So I just say, well, this is what I do, so maybe you want to go somewhere else or whatever. Or I don't worry about it, Benji.
I worry because I worry in the sense that I'm always trying to make it simpler, and I'm always trying to make it more effective. And so, I'm trying to think of what's going on where it doesn't work. And I was wondering if, you just go, well, people aren't ready, or you go, now what's stopping them from, maybe it's my bald head or something else.
Use a different set of words. If you can find something other than five senses and mental or whatever, that might work. I don't know. I don't do as much now. Yeah, as you well know, I don't do as much client work anymore. I present to businesses and organizations.
Right.
Ergo, I'm usually presenting to more than one person.
Right, and so there will be enough. When you have more than one person, generally there are enough
people. There's 10 people in the room, 8 of them are going to pick it up.
Right. And then so they generally carry the others over.
Right. They'll win them over. So that doesn't show up to me, and within, and that's that next iteration of the matrix, which was what's our shared purpose, or what's your shared purpose.
Yeah.
People enjoy talking about that and getting into that, and so then it carries the crowd really well. On the recording, a little bit of advice for people, even in a group like that, it's a really good idea to start off with who's important to you. And the reason being is that, as Benji and I already discussed, almost everybody can answer that question. I mean, literally, like 999 out of 1,000 people can answer that question, so they're successful. And you can just see the room calm down and see everybody just sort of settle in, because it's enjoyable to bring to mind who and what's important to you, and then have it put up onto a board and doing that. And I discovered, because I've done a lot of presentations in my life, and I'm like, wow, I'm never going back to any other opening than who's important to you, because it works so darn well. So just a little thing, that little question really works well with a group as well. And especially, even more so if you're in like a conflict resolution kind of situation or something, definitely start with who's important to you, because everybody will talk about it, and then they find common ground. Like, oh, your wife's important to you? Hey, same with me. Cool. Yeah. So it's that you find common ground instantly, and you don't even have to try and search for common ground. You find it. It's right there, right with you all the time. So,
and so you mentioned this thing about, I don't know if you remember, but I heard you say at some point, you said, oh, somebody was asking me, where do I see the matrix going? And maybe you also said this when you came here in Montreal, and you said, do you remember what you said?
Less words.
Less words, exactly, less words. And so, that's been kind of sloshing around in my mind for a number of years. And then about a year ago, I started using lots of drawings with kids, especially, and teenagers. Teenagers that I say of all ages until the end of adolescence, about 39 years old or something. And so we've been drawing those, using those cards with really are less words now.
Same pictures of them, yeah. So
a really simple icon, and something really interesting happened with them. That, like, one of my interns in the center was having this incredible effectiveness scores, and in fact, she still has them. And I was wondering what she was doing that I wasn't doing, And what she was doing is she was printing the cards that they'd been working around and giving them to the clients to take home. And I
Those
thought,
cards,
oh,
the ones you were just
yeah,
holding
those cards, right. So with the steps, we have cards that go with the steps and stuff. And then I thought, oh, I'm going to do something like this. I'm going to send a PDF of the cards that we saw in the day. And my effectiveness went up.
Isn't that
And
interesting?
so the less words works, I have to tell you, it does work. And people will now say, I'm noticing this thing. I was working with this client with very, very severe, multiple complex PTSD, and we did a little bit of the blending. And I said, no, it's all about noticing when it shows up, noticing this, noticing that, or noticing maybe, 5 senses stuff, anything. And then she came back the week after that, and she said, of course, at the end of the session, she said, I hate your cards. But then she came back the week after that, and she said, I put myself in this situation again where the trauma came back to me. And she said, and then I saw this guy. And I was able to kind of say, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. And it was a completely, according to her, a completely different kind of no that she'd been saying before.
There you go.
And she was doing the blending. And I believe it may even been easier for humans to blend images than just,
Oh, more than likely because images probably would, like predate language.
They would predate language.
Right.
And
cool.
Yeah, so that's
toward that end, yeah, definitely in the preschool set and stuff, there's been people do just pictures like you did, and those are very effective. As I said, I could use them with my groups and organizations. That might help. But I think it's a good idea. And the story, by the way, is I was standing in Kelly Wilson's living room.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right.
5 or 6. And he said, Kevin, where do you see your act work going? And I said, less words. And Kelly followed with cool.
Cool.
So, I did. I less, but yeah, even less is better. Well, what you're doing, to go back to the discrimination task, they're just making it easier for them to discriminate with pictures.
Yes, we're giving very easy stimuli that they can work from.
Right, and makes it even easier. So that's even better. Probably one of my hang-ups is I don't draw very well.
Yes, I don't. I went to this. You can buy for $50 a year subscription to this online icon service. And these people all over the world who like to draw icons, they put the icons on there, and you can just download them and use them.
They drew that icon?
It's called Noun, N-O-U-N project.
Wow.
And that's where I get all the icons from.
Oh, that's where you get them from. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Yeah, so less words, you're right. That's even better. Pictures are less words. Absolutely.
I thought you might like to know that, we've taken your advice to heart, and it's the way.
Well, it makes sense because then you don't have to use the machinations of RFT so much within the human mind.
You do use them. I believe what it does is it activates the whole network, you see, with maybe less chance that you will get lost in the particular learning histories of people.
But you're using an image to stimulate the network rather than other words to stimulate the network. So it's more precise. It's
probably the same thing that happens with the metaphor, right? But now you kind of have, and again, I go back always to this idea, it's not totally technically a discriminative stimulus, but something that will show up and that will, it's almost like they're almost like traffic lights in a sense. I've had clients say, hey, I was going to do it and I noticed this showing up and I thought, wait a minute, am I going to go there again? And sometimes they go, you know what, I chose to do it anyway.
Were you there in the Netherlands when I did that stuck loop thing? In that really hot room?
I missed that.
You keep showing that and that spiral. That was done in a Apple, great. Appledorn, not Appledorn. Damn, what's the
Yeah,
name?
yeah.
They did a conference in
Enschede.
Enschede. Thank you. And we were
Holland.
playing around doing a matrix thing, and I did that spirally loop, stuck loop thing. So really stuck, and I use it. That even works in corporations and stuff.
Oh yeah, it works everywhere.
That works all over. But I like your icon thing. That's a
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Well, you know what? Now that I think of it, to drive up a little bit, businesses are forever liking to put those posters up and such.
Yep.
In the break rooms or whatever. They could put posters up like that.
I think they could. Yeah.
That
And
would
now
be
I have one for couples, right? Welcome to married life.
That's funny.
Have you ever experienced one of those?
I know most people wouldn't laugh at that so much, but you just know I gotta laugh at that. I say all kinds of stuff in that. That drives up a lot of stuff to me. But anyways, that's fun. I like it. Yeah, less words, pictures.
Less words. So here we are, 10 years into the
10
Matrix.
years. Yeah. So
Where is it going to be in 10 years?
I don't know. Let me see. I'll be 74 years old.
Wow.
So hopefully I'll still be kicking.
I bet you will.
Right now. And that'll be interesting because 10 years ago when it started, well, it started in Maine, you know. Now it's pretty well all around the world. So I think it'll keep taking off.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned taking this person in Malaysia. We took it to Vietnam. In Japan, they love it. I'm going to be going back there. I'm taking it to China, so it's really going all over.
I have. Well, it's not so much of where I travel to, but it's where I get emails from. Mm-hmm. And all of those countries you mentioned, I get emails from people using the Matrix and more, obviously. South Korea, I've never gotten one from North Korea, but I don't think I can. But, you know, that's really squirrely. But you know, even the Middle Eastern countries, Afghanistan and Iran and stuff.
Oh yeah, Iran. You know, I'm actually in conversation with them to bring it there also. And
I often, you know,
Iran, China, Russia. They're all the list of rogue nations. I haven't heard anything from Venezuela yet. I'm waiting.
I may not have either, but well, they got it rough down there right now. But yeah, it's just amazing. I love it. We'll keep seeing where it goes. It will. I will keep plugging away at it, and you know, in my way.
So will we. So, well, thank you very much for, you know, bringing this thing into the world. It's certainly changed my professional and personal life.
Well, thank you so much for the co-producing and co-editing and co-writing and all that good stuff with the Matrix books. Those things still sell, by the way.
It's made it simpler. It's made it more fun. And yes, of course, it's still it still sells. Yes, absolutely.
Oh, it's fun. Oh no, it's fun. Anybody listening, yeah, do this. Play with this diagram because you end up having a really good time. Yeah. It's a playful thing, and it's fun. Life is way too seriously to be taken seriously, so it's a fun thing to get some perspective on things. So thanks for having me. And I will turn around and get you interviewed on the Art of Being podcast.
That'd be great. Yeah, let's. Well, when do you want to do that?
I'll send you the link, and you can choose a time.
Very cool.
I make it easy that people get a wide range of times, and they can choose one. And then that puts you into the pipeline, so I get all the stuff done. I'm working on Tom's. Should have today or tomorrow. I'll have that out.
Excellent.
Okay. I will talk to you soon then.
Lovely to see you, Kevin. Take care.
Good to see you. Bye-bye now.